Sound speeds. And if you're a sound professional, filmmaker, or podcaster in need of a short shotgun microphone with a natural sound, then pay close attention, because I'm about to introduce you to the first two microphones released by Rycote. But before we get going, full disclosure, Rycote did send me the HC-15 and HC-22 short shotgun microphones in exchange for a fair review. I do get to keep them following this review, but I'm not going to allow that to affect my opinion, so you can expect this to be a fair and honest review. For starters, how long ago was it that I received these microphones? About 8 months ago. So what took me so long to produce this video? Well, the fact that there are two microphones to compare, and I personally believe that each one of them needed to be properly compared against other microphones with a similar feature set, that's what took me so long. And if I had to do the testing, you're going to have to watch it. Now, actually, technically, you have the luxury of skipping around using the timestamps down below. But if you're interested in looking at something like specifications, noise floor, that kind of thing, then I'm sure someone like Curtis Judd, who also reviewed these microphones, did a wonderful job. And although I have not yet watched this video, I'm sure you can trust it because I do. Curtis Judd is a name you can trust, just like McDonald's if you're interested in fast food. That is a terrible way to word it. Let's say Curtis Judd is more Five Guys if you're looking for a burger. He's not a fillet of fish. Now, what I'm going to be doing in this video is more of a comparison at different heights and that kind of thing. I'm also going to do a moisture test, but let me not get ahead of myself. Let's go ahead and jump right into it. As a side note, the audio comparison portion of this video, which I shot exactly 200 days ago as of the time I'm recording this, on the day after Thanksgiving 2021, has taken me a long time to edit. Why? Well, because there are multiple locations, there are two microphones, different heights, and I do a lot of different comparisons. And in the edit, I had to put graphics on the screen every time you saw a different microphone and heard it. I had to level match each microphone. I had to make sure that each one of them was properly level matched to the overall project. There was a lot of edits. As a matter of fact, there was 1,272 total editing points in the audio comparison portion alone, not including the extra presentation stuff and the other tests. So yeah, I'm glad to have this video finally done. The microphones that we're finally going to start reviewing is the Rycote HC-15 and the HC-22, so named because of their overall length in centimeters. And if you're curious, yes, they are practically identical with a few exceptions. One of the obvious ones is weight. The HC-15 is 90 grams, while the HC-22 is 100 grams. Comparing that to other similar microphones, and the shorter is slightly heavier than the similar length short shotgun microphones like the Rode NTG5 and the Sanken CSm1, while the longer is slightly lighter than similar length shotguns like the Rode NTG3 and the Sennheiser MKH-416. And speaking of the 416, if you were to compare its polar response to that of the HC-22, you'll notice that it's more prone to comb filtering and not quite as smooth rotationally. This is because on the 416, the vents on the side of the interference tube are perpendicular to the interference tube, while on the Rycote microphone, there are two big ones and they run all the way parallel down the interference tube itself. This allows the capsule to hear straight down the tube and off to either side all the way down relatively unobstructed instead of having to interpolate the sound coming in through multiple vents. There is no right or wrong way, just differences in engineering. Further evidence of this reasoning is that on the rear lobe, there are two areas of lesser sensitivity that coincidentally look just like those you would expect from these two vents. The other of the few differences between the two Rycote microphones is the sensitivity, where the HC-22 is 0.6 dB hotter than the HC-15, and both microphones are approximately 6 dB more sensitive than many other short shotgun microphones. While they are both hypercardioid pattern interference tube microphones, which by the way is slightly more narrow in pattern than a supercardioid, the longer of the two has a slightly more narrow pattern, which is to be expected. They are both back-electret as opposed to true condensers, but that's not as a big deal as it used to be because tech has come so far. The capsule and interference tube are each made of machined aluminum, while the preamp is made of brass, giving it natural RF shielding. Additionally, both microphones are extremely well grounded, with a brass ring inside of each XLR connector seamlessly connecting ground pin 1 to the microphone casing, so you shouldn't hear any radio stations, digital wireless RF, or walkies coming down from your XLR. The most impressive spec to me is the ultra-low self-noise of only 8.5 dBA, which is the lowest self-noise I've ever seen on a premium shotgun microphone. All in all, a beautiful design, and as of the time of this video, priced at $779 for the HC-15 and $799 for the HC-22, the price point is very reasonable even considering that each microphone only comes with a case. No shock mount, no clip, no windscreen. Just so it's been shown, here are the technical specifications for each Rycote microphone, and if specs are your thing, knock yourself out. Feel free to look to your heart's content by hitting pause on this video before moving on. But to me, specs are not all that interesting. You know what is? Audio comparisons. So why don't we not waste any more time and dive right into those. I decided that the best way for me to compare these microphones is going to be masked mic style blind. That way you have no preconceived notion of which microphone should sound better based on your preferences. And for that reason, I'm going to put a graphic on the screen that simply says mic 1, mic 2, mic 3, and anytime I change them up, I'm going to identify which microphone was which in the previous test. I may change it every comparison, I may change it each location, who knows? I don't really know just yet how I'm going to do this. I'm going to be doing it in the edit. But what I will say is that the HC-15 is going to be compared to other micro-length short shotgun microphones like the Sanken CSm1 and the Rode NTG5. And as for the HC-22, it's going to be compared against the Rode NTG3 and the Sennheiser MKH-416. And I also need to give thanks where it's due to Aaron Siegel for loaning me the MKH-416 and to True Audio Atlanta for loaning me the CSm1 and the NTG3. Now, I do strongly recommend you wearing headphones for these comparisons because you're going to want to hear all the detail. And without further delay, let's start with the Rycote HC-15. We're now shooting inside. There's a carpet below me, there's a bed right to my right, and there's a lot of different random hard surfaces throughout this room. But this will give you an idea of the way it would sound like in kind of a normal room, normal kind of environment. I'm not speaking up very loud. There's really no purpose for this for that to be done. But at this time, this is kind of ENG style, going up and over the top of a camera, like the way you would do it if you were pointing a microphone at someone in an ENG type environment. So that is the way that this test right now is kind of simulating that. Let's move on to our next test. The microphones are now coming up from underneath. Because we're inside, you're going to be hearing a lot more reverb off the walls around me. Now, this is not acoustically reinforced or anything like that. This is just kind of a regular type room if you were shooting in here. And you might want to try to do a little bit to try to get the microphone closer, so that way it's going to eliminate and dissipate some of the reverb off the walls. But if you were coming up from underneath in a room like this and this was not planned, this is what you would be dealing with. The microphones are now directly over the top of my head. This is an ideal circumstance in this recording environment. The microphones should sound very good at this height. Maximum signal to noise ratio, my voice is nice and close. It's not going to be hitting the microphones with any plosives, and you're not going to be hearing any kind of background noise really from this room. Maybe a little bit of reverb, but that's about it. I'm not speaking up very loud because I don't feel like I need to. If I were to raise my voice, it would be kind of useless and crazy. I don't feel like I need to. So let's go up a little bit higher and let's see what happens there. The microphones are now about 6 inches over the top of my head. This is probably a little bit more of a realistic type environment if you were shooting in an environment like this and had to deal with wides and tights. Maybe not super wide, but maybe a little bit on the wide side, maybe like a medium, loose medium, and a tight. This would probably give you very good tracks if you were to have to boom in this kind of a circumstance. The microphones are now about 1 foot over the top of my head, but keep in mind, I'm not doing any post-processing or anything like that. I want you to keep in mind which microphones you like at which height, which ones start to sound best on the mids, the lows, the higher frequencies, which ones sound the most crisp. Ideally, less reverb, better rejection, better signal to noise ratio. Let's go up a little bit higher and see what we're dealing with there. The microphones are now 18 inches over the top of my head. The louder they go, the more I'm going to be tempted to raise my voice. But at this height, I'm not having to raise it a whole lot, and that's a good thing because you're hearing a lot of reverb off the walls, the ceiling, and everything. So let's go up even higher and see what we're dealing with up there. The microphones are now 2.5 feet over the top of my head. At this point, you're getting quite a bit of reverb in this room. The higher we go, the more of that's going to happen. And you're also going to be getting a lot more play from my voice off the different surfaces. It also doesn't help that the higher the microphone is, the more I'm naturally wanting to raise my voice. So let's go up even higher and see what happens way up near the ceiling. At 2.5 feet over the top of my head in a quiet environment, you're able to hear my voice and pull it out quite well. If someone was very talented at post, they could probably de-reverb it and maybe save something and make this track sound better than a lav would. But who knows how talented your post people are, so don't rely on them to do such a thing. If you can tame some of these reverberations, then by all means do that. But at this height, this is what we're dealing with. The microphones are now approximately 2 millimeters below the top of the ceiling, so it's kind of crazy to imagine someone booming in this kind of a circumstance, but I'm sure it's happened. Not by me, because at this point I probably want to be doing the kind of up over the camera type technique and try to get a little closer, playing the angles of the boom a little better, rather than getting it up on the ceiling and literally on the ceiling. But regardless, let's go into our second location, which is a little bit more reverberant than this one, and see how well these microphones do in that environment. We're now inside my garage, and this is by no means an ideal place to record in. There's a wall approximately 2 feet to my right, there's one about 8 feet in front of me, about 10 feet behind me, and about 14 feet to the left. The refrigerator is currently turned off, and I'll be turning it on partway through this test. But right now, this is kind of like the ENG style up and over. If you can't boom directly over someone for lighting reasons, that's kind of what this is simulating. So hopefully you've gotten a good idea of what this sounds like, because we're moving on to our next test. We're now coming up from underneath, which is by no means an ideal circumstance if you're in an environment like this, because you're hearing more bass coming into the microphones. But because we're in a reverberant environment, you're hearing more play and coloration coming off of all the surfaces around me. Because they're hard, they're going to be reflecting more of that bass right back into the microphone. Not an ideal circumstance anyway, but it's even worse when you're coming up from underneath. So let's do some overhead traditional type settings with it directly over my head first. The microphones are now even to the top of my head. This is an ideal signal-to-noise ratio and recording environment in an environment like this. The higher we go up, the more reverb you're going to start to get coming into the interference tubes off of everything else. And because the short interference tubes are as short as they are, then you're going to be picking up my voice closer to the capsule, which means more detail. So as we start to go up, that's going to start falling off as well. But for right now, this is ideal circumstances. That's why I've been vamping on a little bit longer than normal and letting you hear me in this environment. I've now raised the microphone 6 inches so that they're 6 inches over the top of my head. And this is the way that they're going to sound in a reverberant type environment like this with no background noise. I mean, there is background noise in an environment like this, but not like it when you go outside and start messing around doing exteriors. That's when it's going to really come into play and start to be very annoying. But for right now, inside of an environment when my entire family is away from the house, it's not that bad at all. The microphones are now about 1 foot over the top of my head. My neighbors are outside, and they're starting to do a little bit of work on their front yard, putting up Christmas decorations, but that's not really affecting me inside of a closed garage. But you will hear occasionally a little sound here or there from them as they're hammering a nail in or something like that. But there's no other sounds inside this garage, so let's go up even higher. Now 18 inches over the top of my head. I've been recording these audio tests in various different locations now for nearly 3.5 hours. My jaw is actually starting to hurt because I didn't have lunch a little while ago, and my chest is also starting to hurt. This is an indicator that I need to grab a snack or something to eat. I probably should have gotten some water or something like that and brought it with me as I've gone off to do these tests as well, but I don't have that on me right now. So a few more tests and then we will finally be done with this. But let's go on up even higher and see what we're dealing with there. The microphones are now 2 feet over the top of my head, and I'm going to do 2 comparisons in this environment at this height. And the reason why is because these are short shotgun microphones and not going to reject out nearly as well as they would if they were longer shotgun microphones. Now, right now, you're not hearing any background noise. But now the refrigerator is on, so you can hear what it sounds like when there's a refrigerator going in the background over someone's dialogue. This is by no means an ideal circumstance, and you would want to kill any refrigerators that there would be if you were going to be recording in your garage like this. But then, hey, you have a microphone this far over your head, you might as well throw some stuff at it and see how it does. Now at this time, I'm also going to go quiet and let you listen to it and see how well you like the background noise when everything is gained and staged to be exactly matched. Two and a half feet over my head, and you're getting so much reverb off of all the walls in this room, not to mention the reverb of the refrigerator bouncing off the walls. Now, keeping in mind also that you could roll off anything below probably 80 hertz in post, and it's not going to be affecting a whole lot of your dialogue, if any at all. And depending on the voice that you are going to be doing post work on, you might even be able to go even higher than that, like a female voice or even my voice. We don't have a whole lot of lower frequencies as a rule. So you could probably cut into maybe 100 to 120, maybe even easily without affecting too much. But obviously you want to get your listening ears on and try it for yourself. The microphones are now all the way to the ceiling, approximately 3 feet over the top of my head, maybe a tad bit more because these are short shotgun microphones and the interference tubes are up higher than they were when we did the other longer microphones. Now, this here is the least possible scenario of goodness when it comes down to recording audio in an environment like this. At this point, I would definitely want to play the laws because all I'm hearing in my ears right now is a little bit of the mids and highs in my voice and a whole lot of background reverb coming through this environment. So let's go out into the field and do some exterior tests and see how those turn out. Before we move on, what were we listening to? In both interior comparisons, we had the HC-15 as microphone number 1, the CSm1 was microphone number 2, and the NTG5 was microphone number 3. We're about to mix it up as we move exterior, so let's get into that. I now have this small or low profile version of the short shotgun microphones, and I'm setting my gain on all 3 of these to be correct on my Mix Pre 6 here, and then I'm going to be level matching them in post. So why don't we start getting to our testing right now, since all of our levels are set. Just like we did with the short shotgun microphones, these very small, low-profile shotgun microphones, they're approximately 2 feet or so away from my mouth and kind of coming up over like what you would imagine to be a camera if you were doing it ENG style. Now, granted, you wouldn't normally use short shotgun microphones or microphones with this short of an interference tube outside unless you really wanted to for some particular reason, like maybe it had a lot of rejection or reach, but, you know, that's at least the reality that we're dealing with right now for this test. So why don't we move on? Another real-world test, if you were unable to boom for some reason overhead, you could come up underneath. And the microphones are all approximately 2 feet or so away from my mouth, and this is the way it would sound if it's kind of coming up from underneath. You're going to get a little bit more bass out of the chest because that's closest to the microphone, and you're still going to be picking up the mids and highs just fine because it's still down the barrel, straight down in line with the mouth. But bass is the main thing that you're going to be hearing different, in addition to the fact that now you're going to be hearing any airplanes or anything overhead versus feed or leaves rustling on the ground below me. All 3 of these short shotgun microphones are now directly over the top of my head and even more or less with the top of my head. And this is an optimum fidelity type environment for best possible signal to noise ratio. We're getting a little bit of wind in here now, and it doesn't really matter if it's a short shotgun or if it's a long shotgun, any microphone is going to be, you know, feel the effects of wind. And that's just the reality that you have when you don't use any sort of wind protection on microphones exterior. But right now, this is how they sound in an ideal circumstance, directly even with the top of my head. We're now approximately 6 inches over the top of my head with all 3 of these short shotgun microphones. I need to find out what these low-profile microphones would actually be called, because I'm sure there's a name for them if they're extremely small. Now, I do want to point out one thing. Although the interference tubes and microphone lengths are different, it does not correspond or correlate to additional reach. So don't necessarily think the Sanken CSm1 is going to not reach as well as the other 2 simply because it is smaller. That's not the case at all. It all has to do with the engineering. We're now approximately 1 foot over my head. The farther away from my mouth I go, the more background noise is going to be coming into these shorter interference tubes. And ideally, you want to play these microphones as close to the mouth as possible. You don't really want to go up too high because, you know, you're going to have a lot more background noises coming into these shorter interference tubes. But at this point, which shouldn't be that far off because, you know, that bad, because we're only about a foot or so off of my mouth. These lower profile short shotgun microphones are now about 18 inches over my head. If we were in a breezeway shooting exterior, you should be able to pick up my voice just fine at a distance like this. And if the shot dictated that you couldn't get a longer shotgun microphone in there and you had to use something short, if a microphone overhead at all, then this would be an ideal option at this particular height and at this distance. We're now about 2 feet over my head. The higher we go with these microphones, the less fidelity you're going to get out of them. Now, I want you to start paying attention at about this time as to which microphone you might like better than others. Some might have better reach or sound better with mids or lows or highs or something like that than the others. They might also do better with rejecting out background noise. So why don't I go quiet right now and get an idea of what it sounds like in this particular environment. We're now about 2.5 feet over my head, and at this point, the microphones are starting to get to the end of the first segment of this boom pole. The higher we go up, the more you're going to start to lose some of the lower frequencies, especially in comparison to the microphones that we listened to earlier. But at this point, we should still be able to pick them out pretty decently on all 3 of these microphones, provided that they're engineered to do so. The microphones are now 3 feet over my head. Now, short shotgun microphones, you would definitely be able to pull out a voice pretty well at this height, but what about the shorter, lower profile short shotgun microphones? Are you going to want to use something like this in an exterior? Well, this is the way my voice would pick up just fine if I'm a little bit, on the loud side, which I am, in this exterior environment. Why don't we go up a little bit higher and see at what point you think that it's no longer usable. 3.5 feet over my head now, and this is a game of inches at this point. 3 feet to 3.5 feet to 4 feet. It's all going to be right there on the cusp of what is and what is not usable on a microphone of this length. So start paying close attention if you haven't already been, to see at what point you would say, this microphone really isn't what I would want to use in this environment. Keep in mind, you still have no idea if it's microphone 1, 2, or 3 that you like the most, so start keeping in mind which one you like better at different heights. This is now 4 feet overhead, and at this point, I'm no longer going to be going up in 6-inch intervals. I'm going to be skipping in 1-foot intervals. Because if you're using a short shotgun microphone, especially a low-profile version like what we're listening to here, then you're not going to be able to tell much of a difference between the background noise level in one distance and another at 6 inches. At this point, it's going to start to get to the point where, the distance is kind of ridiculous. We're now 5 feet overhead with these 3 microphones. You're going to start to hear more ambience come into the interference tubes the higher I go up, especially starting around this height. In comparison to a longer shotgun microphone, it's not going to be able to resist nearly as much of that background noise nearly as well. Why don't I go quiet and let you listen to the background noise before we move up to 6 feet? At this point, we're 6 feet over my head. You're going to be hearing my voice still just fine because it's a quiet environment, but you're going to be hearing a lot more ambient noise levels behind, especially in the lower frequencies. Keeping in mind, lower frequencies carry a greater distance over, a distance than other frequencies do when you're talking about non-directional sound. Now, at this point, I want you to note that if you were to apply a roll-off in post, you'd probably be able to get rid of some of those lower end rumbles and not really affect my vocal frequencies very much at all. That may be the difference between usable dialogue and non-usable dialogue at this height. We're now 8 feet over my head, and at this distance, they're picking up not only a lot more ambience noise, but a lot less of my voice. The signal-to-noise ratio is now starting to work a little bit not in its favor, and working against us here as opposed to with us. You're going to start to hear more noises from airplanes, dogs, people driving, all those kinds of things as we go higher and higher up. We're at the second end of the second segment here on this boom pole. We got 2 more segments to go. The microphones are 10 feet over my head, keeping in mind that that's about an extra 9 inches or so to my mouth. So 10 feet overhead, and I would personally not be choosing one of these microphones at all unless I had no other choice. Because, in my opinion, it's not going to be picking me up nearly as well as I would like. Now, granted, I am still listening in the exterior location and have not gotten into post yet, but I can't imagine my opinion being that this suddenly miraculously picks up my voice so much better than I was expecting to. At this distance of 12 feet overhead, it's kind of ridiculous in my opinion to use a microphone with this short of an interference tube. It may be able to pick up my voice just fine, but you're going to be picking up so many other sounds, it's not going to be rejecting up nearly as well in my opinion as a short shotgun microphone with a longer interference tube than these. Let's go up into higher and see what happens. We're halfway up our final segment on this ambient QP5150. We're at 14 feet over my head now. And again, same kind of thing as before. It's picking up my voice probably about as well as it's going to, but let's go ahead and pause at this point rather than full stick and listen to the background noise. We're now full stick on this ambient QP5150, and at this point with these short shotgun microphones, they are all approximately 16 feet over the top of my mouth or about 15 feet over the top of my head. And at this distance, you're probably not going to be using this microphone, if you have any other microphone like a plant microphone, a lav mic, or a short shotgun microphone also in play. But who knows, you may be silly and wanting to do it just for the sake of doing it, or maybe you could be playing perspective. I don't know, I'm not going to judge you. Your sound is your sound. I'm just bringing you the results, but why don't we get out of this location and go to a noisy location? This is our noisy exterior location, which I'm sure you can tell by the fact that cars keep driving by on both sides. You can't see the ones on this side, but you can definitely see the ones behind me. You're going to hear more background noise. You're going to hear more wind. You're going to hear everything because it's a very noisy location. But it is very much like what happens in the real world. Oh, this is such a pretty location. It's right by the interstate. It doesn't matter. It's a pretty location. We have to shoot there. This is what it's like. And this camera is right now, an imaginary camera is right here. We're shooting kind of up and over it as if there was a lighting issue. This is ENG style at its best, I guess. Now all three microphones are coming up from underneath. If you were trying to use my body as a baffle, you're facing the wrong ways. Cars are on the road this way, cars are on the road behind me, and there's going to be airplanes overhead. So unless there's a really bad noise coming from directly behind me, you normally wouldn't want to do this in a noisy environment like this. But this is ENG style, or like you would use the scripted world of television or features if you needed to come up from underneath for some reason. But this is what it would be like in this environment. The microphones are now even more or less to the top of my head. If you have to record in an exterior location like this, this is an ideal circumstance to be doing it in. Very close miking to someone's mouth. And if the frame was at the top of my head, then hey, you're going to be getting ideal signal to noise ratio. Let's go up a little bit higher to a more realistic type headroom scenario. I've raised the microphones to 6 inches over my head. Still an ideal circumstance if you were trying to close mic somebody. It's not nearly as loud as it could be, but I guess that's because at the time of this video, I'm shooting only a couple of days after Thanksgiving, and I guess people just haven't started traveling back into town just yet. There's a lot of traffic on the road behind me, or behind you rather, but it's not really getting into the microphone that much because it's few and far between at this time. The microphones are now about 1 foot over my head. You're going to hear more ambience creeping into these microphones earlier than you were in the quiet location, and that's to be expected. I'm still talking a little bit on the loud side like is typical to my nature, so you got to keep that in mind as well. But at 1 foot over my head, this is the way I sound in this kind of environment. Luckily, it's not been terrible out here just so far yet. The microphones have been raised now to 18 inches over my head. You're hearing more background noise, you're hearing more just overall, background rumble and everything. Now, keep in mind that if you were to apply a low frequency roll-off, like a high-pass filter, maybe around 80 hertz, you're not going to be cutting into my voice. Well, actually, considering it's my voice that we're talking about, maybe closer to 150. Granted, it wouldn't be that high, but you know what I mean. If you want to roll off a little bit of the lower end, you very well could, and you're not going to be cutting into the frequencies of my voice that much. The microphones are 2 feet over my head, and at this point, they're starting to pick a lot more of the background noise around us because remember, those interference tubes are not that long, so they're going to start to pull in more sounds that are passing by the microphone and going to be caught up in the pattern as well. Let's go on a little bit higher and see what it's going to do. Actually, you know what we're going to do at this time? We're going to go quiet and let you hear the ambience noise level the way it would be with this gain staging at 2 feet over my head. We're now 2.5 feet over the top of my head. At this point, you should still be able to pick up my voice just fine between the cars. When the cars come by and you hear those engines rumbling, it's going to be a little bit on the overwhelming, overpowering side. But as we go higher, it's going to get even worse. So let's go on up to 3 feet and see what happens. We're now 3 feet over my head, and at this point, you're going to be listening for the rejection of these microphones to see which one is going to be rejecting out the background noise the best on my voice, while still pulling out my voice in optimum clarity and fidelity. So start to listen for the lows, mids, and highs in my voice, keeping in mind that I'm not processing anything in post. This is just the microphones as it's being recorded onto the sound devices mixed pre-6 here on the day that I'm shooting this. The microphones are now 3.5 feet over my head. At this point, they're outside of my comfort level for using a microphone with this short of an interference tube. At this point in a noisy environment, you would probably be considering to use something like the lavs, if not a longer shotgun microphone, because you'd want that added rejection. But at this height, this is what these microphones sound like in a noisy exterior location. These microphones are now 4 feet over my head. And I'm getting closer and closer to the interstate, which is only like 60 feet behind me. I hate that I said like just then, but you get an idea of how it would sound if you're this close to an environment that's noisy, like for example, an interstate. One of the many interstates we have that has a lot of traffic going down it. Now, keep in mind also, it could be louder or quieter depending on what is directly behind you. But right now behind me, it's just completely free and clear. directly to the interstate, and so every engine you are hearing. Remember, no post effects or roll off or anything added. This is just the way it sounds coming down the barrel on these microphones at 4 feet. The microphones are now 5 feet over my head, and at this point, you're going to start to lose my voice in the background noise quite a bit. Now, maybe not so much at this time because there's, not a whole lot of engine noise and tires and stuff like that on the vehicles behind me, but the higher I go, the crazier it's going to get. And you're starting to hear my voice also being mixed in with the cars that are going behind the camera. So let's go on up to 6 feet and see what happens. We're now 6 feet overhead, and at this point you're going to be really losing my voice in the background noise in this environment. If you were shooting here, you would definitely want to talk to your director and say, if you want to use this audio at all, we got to get in for coverage and lose the wide shot. Can we do these separately? You would have no other choice if you want to try to save this audio. But at this height, at 6 feet over my head, this is the way I sound. The microphones are now 8 feet over my head. At this point, we're halfway extended on this ambient QP5150 boom pole. The cars behind the camera are lightening up just a little bit, but that's okay. We're probably going to hear them again momentarily. You're hearing a lot more of the background noise because the higher the microphones get, the more it's going to be pulling those sounds into the pattern. You just heard a car drive behind the camera. That's the way it's going to sound from here on out as my voice gets lost more and more in the ambience noise. We're now 10 feet over my head. Very ridiculous height in this noisy of an environment with these short shotgun microphones that are low-profile versions of longer microphones that are made by every single one of these companies. Sanken, Rycote, Rode, they all make longer shotguns than the ones that we're using right now in this noisy environment. But hey, this is the way it sounds, so we got to do these tests, don't we? The car's driving by the camera. I might go ahead and cut and go to the higher height at this time. We're now 12 feet over my head. There are yellow jackets starting to land on me, and it's starting to make me a little bit nervous. I wonder if I'm standing near a yellow jacket's nest. I would like to think that they would not be bothering me because it's kind of cold out here, but, hey, I'm not going to really complain that much because I am in their turf. I wonder if that insect that's crawling down my leg right now is indeed a yellow jacket. As soon as we go up to a higher height, I'm going to have to pause and look. These microphones are now 14 feet over my head. I can proudly report I have no idea what was crawling up my leg just a moment ago. It was definitely small, could have been a yellow jacket, but I don't know for certain. Who knows what it was? It could be anything out here. But I'll tell you, I'm very happy to get near the end of this boom pole right now because, in all honesty, I'm not hearing much more than just the highs of the highest parts of my voice and ambience noise in my headphones. We're now full stick on an ambient 5150 boom pole that's 16 feet over the top of my mouth, just over 15 feet over the top of my head. At this point, I'll be very impressed if you're pulling out all the details of my voice and hearing them just fine. And if you're a post guy and you can do something with this sound, hey, I love your work already. I don't even need to hear it. If you're telling me that you're able to save this audio and make it sound decent, I love your work, and don't let anyone ever tell you that it's bad. But let's get out of this location and go back to the studio. For both of our exterior tests, the CSm1 was microphone number 1, the HC-15 was microphone number 2, and the NTG5 was microphone number 3. The NTG5 remained the same, while the other two swapped from the first two series of tests. Now, if you took your headphones off, put them right back on, because we're about to compare the HC-22 to the MKH-416 and the NTG3. We're now inside of a slightly reverberant type room. We're shooting in a bedroom. There's a bed right here. There's carpeted floor. There's walls that are hard. And of course, the ceiling is hard. You don't normally put carpet on the ceiling. This is by no means a sound-treated environment. And if you were coming up kind of over the camera, like if you were doing it ENG style or trying to kind of get closer to the camera and couldn't really shadow an actor very well, this is what this is kind of simulating. The microphones are approximately 2 feet or so away from my mouth, and this is the way it sounds. The microphones are now coming up from underneath, and at this point you're going to be getting more bass off of my chest. But this is still a very real-world scenario that you find yourself in when doing movies and television, scripted, both non-scripted, corporate events, sometimes too even. You would have to come up from underneath because there could be a lot of lights all around, and coming from underneath is the only way to do it. Sometimes presidents, you have to address them that way if they're sitting down in order to avoid the shots from photographers and stuff from above. This is a very real-world scenario that you run into in ENG scripted, both unscripted and reality type television situations, but this is how it sounds in this room. When it comes to microphone placement, this may be as about ideal as it comes. Now, keep in mind that if you are using short shotgun microphones, you may be having proximity effect issues if you are too close to someone's mouth, and that's not necessarily what you'd want to be going for effect-wise when you're doing a movie or a television show. You might want to back off just a little bit to give yourself a little bit more of a realistic type sound. Too close, and it's going to be too bass heavy. So let's go up a little bit higher and see what we're dealing with up there. The microphones are now 6 inches over my head. This is more natural sound, even if it's not as close, where you hear all the crinkles and pops in my mouth. By no means do I like to record all of that when I'm doing dialogue. I like it to sound a little bit more natural, and that's the kind of environment that we're going for right now at this height. And if you go much higher, it's going to start to sound a little bit different reverb-wise. We're now 1 foot over the top of my head. You're starting to hear a little bit more reverb in this room, even though my voice is still being pulled out detail-wise just fine by the interference tubes on these short shotgun microphones. Now keep in mind, the higher we go, the more play you're going to start to get off of every single surface. Not as much as you would with the short shotgun microphones that we tested earlier, but these are a little bit longer interference tubes, so they're going to pull me out a little bit better while rejecting out those background noises a little on the better side as well. So let's go up even higher and see what it's like up there. We're now 1.5 feet over the top of my head, and at this point, I'm hearing a lot more reverb than I was even 6 inches closer. So I don't know if you're hearing the same kind of thing. Keep in mind, the higher you go, the more reverb and other sounds are going to be coming back in, including echoes and reverb. If there's air conditioner or something on, or a heater, that's not the situation I have in this house right now, but you're going to be hearing a lot more of that playing off the walls as well. Let's go up even higher and see what's up there. We're now 2 feet over the top of my head, and at this point, the microphones are getting a lot of play off the walls around me and even the ceiling. The higher we go, the more play you're going to start to get off of it, and it's going to start coloring the sound a little bit. Not an ideal circumstance at any height really, but the higher you go, the worse it's going to get. Let's go up even higher. We're now 2.5 feet over the top of my head, getting close to the roof, but this is the way it sounds in this particular environment. Even with short shotgun microphones, you're not going to be able to reject out a whole lot, even when there's a carpeted floor below you. Keep this in mind as we go even higher. We're only about 3 inches higher than we were in the previous test because the interference tubes are quite a bit longer and we're up against the ceiling. Just less than 3 feet, and this is how it plays off the walls. Let's go into a noisier, well, I should say another type of interior environment, but one with more reverb, and see what it's like there.
Whoa, hold on a second there before we go to the garage. Microphone number 1 was the 416, microphone number 2 was the NTG3, and microphone number 3 was the HC-22. Okay, now I've said that, we're going to be switching things up a little bit and going into the garage.
We're now in my garage, so not an ideal circumstance regarding echo and reverb, but it's fine for background noise. Now keep in mind that there is a wall right next to me. There's one about 6 or 8 feet in front of me. There's one about 10 feet behind me, and there's another one about 14 feet away. The ground is concrete, and there's a ceiling overhead that you're going to see more in the shots later on. And this is kind of the ENG style coming up and over the camera. This is what it would sound like, maybe about 2 or so feet off the mic. Now we're coming up from underneath, still the same distance, about 2 feet or so away from the mouth, but now you're picking up the chest cavity and this little, zipper that's going to be dinging around if I were to move. But this is the way it would sound like coming up from underneath with all 3 of these microphones in a reverberant type environment like this garage. The microphones are now even to the top of my head. This is an ideal circumstance for signal-to-noise ratio optimization if you're in any kind of an environment, whether interior or exterior. Now, in this environment here, if a microphone was this close, you could actually drop the gain a little bit, so that way you're hopefully not going to be catching as much of the background reverb. But hopefully, if you were in an environment like this, you're not going to be speaking up nearly as loud as I am right now. Like, for example, they'd be talking at a more ideal level like this. And at this point, my voice is not powerful enough to bounce off of as many walls as it would be if it was louder, so you're not going to hear nearly as much reverb. The microphones are 6 inches over the top of my head. The higher I go up, the more you're going to be hearing the reverb bouncing off of all the surfaces in this room and environment. This garage is by no means an ideal place for recording. It's at least quieter than it would be if we were shooting outside. If I hit the garage door, you'd hear all the ambience come in. But for right now, this is not a situation that we're having to deal with. It's just the microphone 6 inches over my head, and that's perfectly well within anything that we would want to have background and signal-to-noise ratio-wise. The microphones are now 1 foot over the top of my head, and there's multiple different things going to be happening as we get higher and higher. First of all, we're going to be farther away from my mouth, so it's going to sound more like it's farther away. You're also going to be picking up more of my reflections off the walls and even the floor below me. But as I get closer to the ceiling, you're going to be hearing more play off of the rear lobe of the microphones, because that's going to become a very big reality when you get up near the ceiling. So right now, 1 foot is where we are right now. The microphones are now 1.5 feet over the top of my head. The higher I go, the closer we're getting to the ceiling, and at this point, we're across the threshold and over half the distance between the top of my head and the ceiling. So at this point, it's kind of starting to get very reverby, isn't it? And a post guy who is very skilled might be able to do some good things with a de-reverb type effect, but still it's better to get it cleanly in not this kind of an environment. We're now 2 feet over my head, and if you've been listening closely, you've not heard a refrigerator in the background until now. Now there is a refrigerator because in that corner of this room, there is a refrigerator and it now cycled on. I'm going to go quiet at this time and let you hear the ambient noise level in this room, and we'll see exactly what you think of it. And based on the proper gain staging that we have for 2 feet over the top of my head, what does it sound like noise level wise with regards to rejection? We're now 2.5 feet over my head. We're pretty far away from my mouth and very close to the ceiling. You're picking up a lot of reverb on the wall behind me, on the floor below me, and the walls all around me because my voice is on the loud side. Now, if I were to speak at more of a normal volume, this is the way it would be like. And so it's a little bit better and easier to manage, but still, it's not ideal by any means. You don't want to shoot in an environment like this if you have to have the microphone up near the ceiling. But still, there's one more stage to go to, and we're going to go there now. By any stretch of the imagination, if you have to have a microphone up against the ceiling like this, hopefully it's being planted and you can get a boom closer as soon as you get in for coverage. You don't want to do this kind of thing, and in this kind of a reverberant environment, you're probably going to want to resort to the lofts. But let's get out of this location and go out into the field and see what it's like doing some exteriors.
And now that we're done in the garage, I'm going to do yet another reveal because I want to change things up before we move exterior. Microphone number 1 still was the 416, but microphone number 2 was the HC-22, and the Rode NTG3 was microphone number 3. What did you think there? Now we're about to move exterior and see how these interference tubes work outdoors. Okay, I'm just verifying that the levels look right on all 3 of these microphones, and they seem to. Now I'm going to further check them in post just to verify that they're exactly the same. And the gain is set about this standard distance, maybe about, what is it, a foot or so off of my mouth. And the levels are all fine right here, so we're going to stay consistent as we go up. For our first test, you're looking at me profile because I want to show you approximately how high these microphones are and the distance they are off of my mouth. Approximately 2 feet or so is how far away they are, and I'm doing this as kind of like what it would be like if you were going ENG style up and over the top of a camera and you were trying to pull out someone's voice at maybe 2 or so feet away. So this is what it would sound like in this kind of an environment, which is our exterior quiet location. On to our second test. This is another ENG style test where the microphones are coming up from underneath. Now, in the real world, as a boom operator, you would also come up from underneath sometimes if you were trying to either use someone's body as a baffle to, reduce background noise, or if you had the sun and the lighting was just not cooperative with you and you had to come up from underneath because there was no other way to get your dialogue. But this is how it sounds on all 3 of these microphones when I'm switching around in a quiet location. All 3 of the microphones are now straight up and down directly over the top of my head and even with the top of my head, or more or less. Now, if you were trying to go for maximum signal to noise ratio, this would be ideal. The microphones are close to my voice, picking up my voice just fine and very, very well at this range. So why don't we go on up a little bit and see how it does a little bit higher up. All 3 microphones are approximately 6 inches over the top of my head now. We're well within a good range to get a good signal-to-noise ratio on all 3 of these short shotgun microphones. So as we continue higher and higher, the microphones are going to start to sound thin. They're going to start to pick up even more wind noise like what you're hearing right now, so sorry about that. And keep in mind that, the higher we go, since there is no wind protection on these microphones, you're going to hear some of it, but that would give you an idea, an indicator as to how well these microphones perform against a light wind. This is why these microphone tests take all day long for me, because even at 1 foot over the top of my head, it takes forever for there to not be any sounds out here in my quiet exterior location. You would think that being a quiet exterior location, there wouldn't be any sounds out here, but there's a train track nearby, there's a road nearby that's going to constantly have a truck driving by, airplanes because the world's busiest airport's nearby, just name it, it's probably around here. Right now though, we're about 1 foot over the top of my head. You may hear a little bit of an airplane tailing off in the background, and that's because there's been no wind for the past 3 minutes while this slow-moving plane has been moving by. But right now, the microphones are approximately 18 inches over the top of my head. If I wanted to touch them, I probably could very easily, but I'm not going to because I don't need to add more noise to these microphones since we're just trying to get a good, solid test out of them at this particular height. So why don't we move on up to 2 feet and see how it goes? I can now touch those microphones if I want to, but I don't want to because what I'm trying to do here is speak in an ideal way, like as if I was having a conversation with somebody and doing maybe acting or something, like what you would use these microphones for, an interview or something. So right now, at 2 feet over the top of my head, we're going to start to get to the edge of the range where these are going to start to sound very, very fat and full at these closer distances where you can get all the bass frequencies. As we continue up higher, though, it's going to start to sound a little on the thin side, but right now at 2 feet, it's not been that big of an issue. And we're going to start to hear more and more airplanes and more background noise, so I'm going to go quiet here and let you hear the ambience at approximately 2 feet over my head, keeping in mind that this is matching ideal gain staging at this distance. The microphones are now 2.5 feet over the top of my head. You should still be able to pick up my voice just fine because they are short shotgun microphones. But if I reach my hand over my head, I would not be able to touch them at this time. But I want you to notice as I go higher and higher up, you're going to be losing some of the frequencies in my voice. Pay close attention to what those are on each of these microphones. Again, you don't know what these microphones are, so as soon as we get up to our maximum height, I'm going to reveal what they are to you, and you're going to be able to see what they are on the screen as well. So that's going to give you an indicator as to how these microphones sound, but in 2.5 feet, I've been vamping on for quite a while because this is a decent enough height that you should be able to tell how these microphones sound. The microphones are now 3 feet over the top of my head, and at this height, you're going to have to start doing a judgment call on whether or not you want a boom or a lav to be on the daily track, if indeed you are mixing. Now, at this height, a boom operator is most likely going to be pushing the edge of the frame because they're going to be doing wides and tights, and most likely those tights are going to be coverage. If not, don't sweat it nearly as much. You'll play as perspective sound, and it'll be just fine if you're just doing a wide at the same time as maybe another wide. But if you're doing a wide and tight, man, that's going to be a bit of an issue. So why don't we start skipping, not so much every 6 inches at this point, but skipping a foot from here on out. The mics are now 4 feet over the top of my head, and this quiet exterior location is quickly becoming a noisy exterior location. Now, I may end up having to suck it up and deal with a little bit of airplane traffic because there's nonstop planes at this time. And if I don't have wind hitting the microphones directly, then I may end up having to just take it and let you see with how it does with an occasional airplane flying by. Right now, there's not really anything too close, so why don't we go on even higher? The microphones are now 5 feet over the top of my head, and as it goes higher and higher, you're going to have to make a judgment call whether or not you play a boom, maybe even switch to a long shotgun microphone, or a lav mic. And you might also say, I prefer this one microphone at a lower height and a different microphone at a higher height. Or maybe you're still sticking to your guns and saying, you know what, I like microphone number 1, 2, or 3 best. And if that's the case, then keep listening for it as I go higher and higher up because it may change on you. The microphones are now 6 feet over the top of my head, and at this point, personally, I would be switching to a long shotgun microphone unless I really liked what one of these microphones did for me. Again, you have no idea what each one of these are, but we're going to go higher up still, and so you'll be able to hear at what point you no longer are interested in using one of these particular microphones, and who knows, you might end up using a lav at this point. The microphones are now 8 feet over my head, and the higher I go up, the less these microphones are going to be picking up my voice amongst the background noise. Now keep in mind, it is still the quiet exterior location, but when we move to the noisy exterior location, well, that's when it's going to start to get a lot of fun. But a couple more heights, and then we'll be going off on there, to see how it does in the exterior noisy location. The microphones are now approximately 10 feet over the top of my head now. We're getting very, very high at this point, and you would not want to use this unless you absolutely had to because lavs or a long shotgun microphone was not an option. But at this height, it's still picking up my voice just fine because the environment is quiet. As soon as we go up higher, well, you're going to have to be the judge of that one. Let's see how well it goes at 12 feet. We're now 12 feet over my head, and this is the way my voice is going to pick up in this environment, and you're, of course, hearing everything level matched because I'm bringing up the level accordingly. Now, why don't I go quiet again so that way you can see what it's like in this environment at this height with the background noise that I'm hearing in this, real-world scenario.
We're now 14 feet over my head, and the higher I go, the more other noises you're going to be hearing as well. Not just because of the signal to noise ratio, but because the higher I go, you're going to start to hear more wind. You're going to be putting the microphone up next to birds, even though we're out in the middle of a parking lot. It's going to start to get noisier and noisier. So why don't we go ahead and max out on this pole at approximately 16 feet and see what happens there. We're now maxed out on this ambient QP5150 boom pole, and that means that it's about 21 feet over the ground with these microphones, and since I'm just under 6 feet tall, then that means that the microphones are approximately 16 feet from my mouth, not the top of my head, so I was a little bit off on that. But either way, this is what it sounds like when it's maxed out on the end of a boom pole going straight over someone's head. At this point, I wouldn't be using this microphone if I had any other option. But why don't we go on to our noisy location, which this location is really wanting to be.
Whoa, stop right there because I'm about to change things up again. But first, the NTG3 was microphone number 1. Microphone number 2 was the HC-22, and microphone number 3 was the 416. How did you like those there? Well, we're about to move into our exterior noisy location and really put these interference tubes to the test.
We're now at our exterior noisy location. Cars are driving all over behind the camera that way, and of course Interstate 85 is right there next to me. The microphones are about 2 feet away from my mouth, and these are these short shotgun microphones with the full-length interference tube. So at this time, we're kind of coming like it's pretending to come up and over a camera like you're shooting ENG style, and this is the kind of thing that you would get if you couldn't go straight overhead. We're now coming from underneath, and I'm looking at these microphones pointed directly at my mouth. They're all straight up in line with my mouth, and it's just going to sound as ideal as possible if you're about 2 or so feet off of someone's mouth coming up from underneath. You're going to be hearing more airplanes if there were airplanes up there, and if I were pointed at the road, you'd be picking that up directly. But that's not why you would come from underneath. It would be more for lighting purposes, wouldn't it? Let's get into some more traditional testing overhead and see how high these can go before they start to fall off sound-wise. These short shotgun microphones are directly to the top of my head right now. This is a best case scenario full signal to noise ratio in a loud environment, or really any environment. This is where you want to be with your microphone, directly out of frame over the top of someone's head. Now, obviously, for our testing here, you see the microphones, but that's fine. This is a sound channel, not a picture channel. You can see the microphones if we're doing tests like this, and it's not going to freak me out, and I'm going to not complain to the DP because I am the DP. The microphones are 6 inches over my head, and at this point, you've still got a great signal-to-noise ratio on my mouth. There's a few cars that are driving behind the camera, I promise I can speak, but if they are driving behind camera on the day of a shoot, then hopefully it would make sense to, like the picture, for example, you're looking into a mirror. If not, it makes no sense for cars to be driving back there, but sometimes you'll be in an event or an environment and you have no other choice. But if it's a set, silence any vehicles behind the camera because you don't see them. Makes no sense. We're 1 foot over my head now, and at this height, you're still able to pick up my voice just fine, even though there are cars driving around behind camera. But the cars that are this direction are on camera, so if you hear them and you see them, it makes sense. If you don't see the cars driving behind camera, then it doesn't make sense to hear them. That's when you'll have sound people complain about sounds. It's when we don't see them. We're now 18 inches over my head. The microphones are starting to get up there a little bit. You should be able to pick up my voice just fine because these short shotgun microphones are going to do hopefully a pretty decent job of rejecting out the background noise. And at 18 inches, it's not going to be overly bad just yet, but just wait, we'll go up even higher and it'll become problematic eventually. We're now 2 feet over my head, and I'm getting closer to the interstate now as I back up away from camera. The camera positioning is staying the same, but as I back up to keep the microphones in the frame, it's going to put me closer to the road. Now, for some reason, there's not a whole lot of vehicles driving behind me at this time, so there goes, oh, there they come. Here they're starting to come in there a little bit now, but I'm going to go quiet here in a second and let you hear the background noise level, considering that at 2 feet over my head, the gain has all been level mashed in post. I'm not going to be adjusting it, and you can hear what it sounds like with the ambient noise level on each of these microphones. We're now 2.5 feet over my head. There's a lot of cars driving behind the camera at this time, but that's okay. That's kind of the reason why I wanted to start recording now, because I'm not going to defeat the cars because they're happening behind me on the interstate as well. The wind, on the other hand, will be a problem. And I can also say that I'm not hearing the airplanes nearly as much at this location. Woohoo! We don't hear airplanes at this location. Although they're still up there, you just can't hear them over the background noise of the vehicles.
The microphones are 3 feet over my head, and it's going to be a little bit on the loud side at this ambience level, but hey, what are we expecting here? You decided to shoot on the side of the interstate next to a road. You're gonna have ambience noise level issues. But my voice, is it picking up just fine? The higher I go, the less fidelity you're gonna hear in it, because it's gonna start to fall into the background noise a little bit. And this ambient noise level is definitely higher here than it was in the first exterior location. We're now 3.5 feet over my head, nearly at the end of the first segment on this ambient QP5150 boom pole. It's very noisy at this time, and you're going to be hearing more and more noise as we start to go higher and higher up, but this is the way it sounds at 3.5 feet over my head in a noisy environment. We're now 4 feet over the top of my head. You're starting to pick up a lot more of the rumbles from the vehicles behind me as they're driving around. Keep in mind, if you were to add a low roll-off, a high pass filter, a low-end roll-off, something along those lines, you're going to be rolling off a lot of those frequencies that would be interfering with the bass frequencies in my voice, if there are any. But I'm also speaking a bit on the loud side, which is helpful in this noisy environment, but you can very easily be playing the lavs if you're going to be using any dialogue out here at all. The microphones are 5 feet over my head right now. If I were to talk at a more normal volume like I am right now, you're going to hear how it's going to be able to be picked up by these microphones, despite the fact that there's a lot of background noise. Not really an ideal situation. In this kind of a circumstance, you definitely not want to be on a wide and tight type scenario unless you can absolutely have to be, because the director has shut you down. Maybe you're losing the light and they say, look, we got to get it, because if we don't, we're going to have no more light to shoot in. But if I were to raise my voice just a little bit, you're going to be able to pick it up much better out here in this environment. And so remember, volume is your friend if you're shooting exterior. It also makes more sense for the environment. 6 feet over my head. Now, what did I mean by it makes more sense in this environment? If you're in a noisy environment, then it makes sense that someone would be speaking up in it. Whenever you have a scene and someone's in a nightclub and people are dancing all over the place on speakers, and you see speakers all over the place, it makes no sense for people to carry on a very quiet conversation, because if you've ever been in a nightclub, you know that you can scream at the person next to you and barely hear them, if at all. So this is what it sounds like 6 feet over my head. Let's keep on going higher. At 8 feet over my head, if I were shooting in an environment like this, I would be resorting, without a doubt, to the lavs, or if that wasn't an option, a long shotgun microphone. Short shotgun microphones are not going to be ideal, in my opinion, in this environment when you're this close to the interstate. In addition to me not liking the fact that the locations department helped define this location to begin with, I would not be happy with the director for choosing this noisy location. But hey, I'm just a sound guy. At this time, the microphones are 10 feet over my head. If it's relatively quiet, like between cars, you're going to hear my voice just fine. You're going to be hearing more of the mids and highs in my voice than the lower frequencies, but who knows? I'm not listening in post right now while I'm out here shooting in the field. I am just sitting there listening as I am out here picking up all the ambience noise that's going into my headphones, driving me completely insane. And this also is a reminder of why I like to shoot in the winter, because if I were shooting out here in the summer, bugs would be all over me. The microphones are 12 feet over my head. The higher they go, keep in mind, the more sound is in front of these interference tubes, so it's going to be picking those sounds up more. And at this height, I would not be wanting to use these shotgun microphones in a noisy environment at all. But still, we have more length on the pole, so let's go on up and see what happens. The microphones are 14 feet over my head. Keeping in mind, I'm still talking a little bit on the loud side, but if I were to go to a more normal volume, this is the way it would sound. My voice is going to be lost a lot more in the background audio, the noise and everything that you're hearing, much more than it would be if it was in the quieter environment or closer. I mean, ideally you would want to be using something more like a lav in this circumstance, because lavs are going to be better as a rule at picking up sound than a shotgun microphone in a noisy environment. It's also going to have less background noise. We're now at full height on this ambient QP5150 boom pole. That's 16 feet over my mouth, just over 15 feet to the top of my head. And at this height, I would not be wanting to use these booms at all, but who knows? In post, you may be surprised at how well these short shotgun microphones do. In the tests that I've done in the past out here where I've taken the microphones higher and higher up, I've been pleasantly surprised with how good these microphones actually sound when you get them into post. And if I was skilled at doing post, perhaps I would really be able to pull out some good tracks. At this time though, with the current gain staging where everything is level matched, I'm going to go quiet and let you listen to the ambient background noise. And now we have completed all of our exterior tests in that noisy location, where the Sennheiser MKH-416 was number 1, the HC-22 was microphone number 2, and the Rode NTG3 was microphone number 3. Which did you like the best in which location? I would love to hear your thoughts down in the description before you hear my reveal as to which ones I like the best in which circumstances. You've been listening to the Rycote HC-15, approximately 15 or so inches away from my mouth, approximately chest high against my computer monitor in this relatively enclosed, controlled environment. And now it's about 6 inches away, so this is the way it sounds there. If you're curious as to the way the HC-22 would sound, then watch my epic live stream for the year 2021. About 15 or so inches away from my mouth and slightly overhead is the Rycote HC-22 until timestamp 2 hours, 28 minutes, 50 seconds, when Mr. 5 Guys, the name you can trust, Curtis Judd, said this.
This is probably a good idea. We should all probably switch up our mics now. Can we just take a couple seconds and do that?
You want to do that?
Sure. So everybody changes.
And if you happen to be watching nearly 17 hours into that live stream, you will have heard me say that the HC-22 was the microphone I used until that switch.
Which is the Rycote, what is it, the HC or MC? HC, I think it is 22. That's what I was using at the start of the stream.
One last test to perform. Some microphones are very susceptible to humidity, and you'll hear pops and crackles, sometimes even a clipping type sound before it completely shuts off if exposed to high humidity. So we should test these microphones against high humidity because we don't know if they're RF or DC bias microphones according to their technical specifications and documentation online. So I feel that we need to expose these microphones to something that's extremely high humidity. Here in the South, we basically have high humidity in the summer. It turns into a sauna if you're outside. And some places in the world are even worse. So let's do a test in extremely high humidity. I turned my shower on full blast, and in moments the bathroom steamed up so much you couldn't even see through the camera lens, but after half an hour, here are my findings. I just took the picture of the microphone that you're looking at on the screen right now, and unfortunately the video camera had the dew sensor turn on, so it shut down a while back. But let it be said, it's very humid in here, and this microphone, well, you tell me, how does it sound? So what do I think? Well, they're certainly worth the money. The build quality is solid and it doesn't feel cheap in any way. The RF shielding is top tier and the specifications are better than most other microphones out there, from maximum SPL to the noise floor. Very detailed sound, and that sound is very natural as you go higher and higher overhead. It doesn't embellish or extend the bass, nor does it give you an over peaky sibilance boost, which is good because if I were to have one note, sibilance. But that's why you need a windscreen on your microphones. I asked my contact at Rycote about windscreens, and I was told it doesn't come with one because we can use whatever we like with them. Weird that a company known for windscreens doesn't even give you one with their flagship microphones. And on their website it says they don't give you a windscreen because to reduce cost, we decided to minimize the packaging and shipping costs by not paying to send air across the world. But they already do that with all of their wind resistance products, so that's a very weird excuse, Rycote. Now I can imagine not giving a shock mount, a clip, a 5/8, 3/8 adapter, that kind of thing. But a windscreen? Really, Rycote? This is what you're known for. It took a couple of days of inquiring, but I finally did get an answer to my question thanks to John Hicks at True Audio, and that was when I learned that the Rycote recommended windscreen are their SGM foam windscreens that are already in their Rycote catalog. Trying to do research about this topic was annoying because Rycote's own website doesn't even list their own mics in the compatibility of their recommended windscreens, nor does their website even acknowledge Rycote shotgun microphones even existing by their manufacturer name or even by their model numbers, regardless of how you format it. But honestly, I'm not a fan of their foam windscreens for these microphones. Ideally, the windscreen should end at the little red band, leaving an adequate and consistent amount of the microphone to be grabbed by the shock mount. That's not the case with either microphone, so if you want to purchase a foam windscreen for either microphone, I strongly recommend against the SGM foams. It's not too late, Rycote. You can still release optimized foam windscreens for each of these two flagship shotgun microphones. Both Rycote microphones sound pretty good to me, especially if you use them in the field. In an environment like this, probably not so much. And because they're so sibilant, I strongly recommend using something like a windscreen with it. Look at the frequency and pulse response on both microphones, and it looks like they're both a little lacking in the low frequencies, but that's where it's measured approximately 1 meter away. You get them closer, like where you would actually want to use them, something like this in this environment, and you're going to find that it fills out much more naturally. The bass seems to come up. If you overhead mic pretty close, you're going to have a pretty good response out of it. It's going to have the mids and highs, which are normally kind of sibilant, going to be passing by the microphone while the bass is still being picked up. It's kind of weird, but it does seem to kind of balance out and fill out. As you go higher and higher, it's going to naturally fall off like your voice does to a human ear. So it kind of seems to work. Keep in mind that neither of these microphones embellish the low end, so if you're expecting it to sound overly bassy like many microphones, it's not going to. It lacks the extended bass response that many of the microphones do, like the ones that I compared to the HC-22, the 416, and the NTG3. But if that's your thing and you're looking for that kind of sound, then hey, go with what you like. I scrambled up the audio test and the comparisons I did earlier so that I didn't even know what I was listening to until I was ready to. I wanted to get into post, do all of my editing and level everything, render it, and then listen and take notes. And that's exactly what I did. After that, I was able to correspond this test with this particular microphone, and that's when I revealed to myself what they were, and here are my findings on that. In all of my tests, I found the HC-15 to sound the most detailed and natural, although a bit sibilant in my bedroom and a little bit too much for my taste in the garage. A windscreen would certainly help with that. Outdoors, the extreme sensitivity to wind was very present, so you must wear wind protection, especially outdoors. Again, it sounds very detailed and natural and rejects out every bit as good as the other two without coloring off-axis sounds. Even high overhead, the mics sound very balanced and natural. Overall, I do like the HC-15, even though it does seem to fall off a little bit in detail quicker than the other two mics. And speaking of the other two mics, my opinion, the Senken CSm1 sounds harsh and lacks low end in every one of my tests. I'm not a fan. In every test, when I switched to that microphone, I wanted to shake my head and cringed even a couple of times. The Rode NTG5 has more bass than the other two, and indoors, it lacks a bit of detail as you go higher overhead. Outdoors, that little bit of extra bass on the NTG5 helps a bit when you get to higher heights. You pull out the fundamental vocal frequencies a little better, and it sounds closer than it actually is. If given the choice of these three microphones indoors, I would say the clear winner was the Rycote HC-15. It seemed to balance best between the low, mids, and highs, no matter regardless of the height, and it still maintained the detail the best. Now, outside, I would say it's more of a toss-up between the NTG5 and the HC-15. Because if you like the more balanced type sound that seems to fall off a little bit in the lows as you go higher and higher up, but still maintains detail, I'd say go the HC-15 route. If you like the little bit of extra bass the NTG5 gives you and how it kind of fills out the sound as you go higher and higher up, go more NTG5. As for the CSm1, I'm not a fan of that thing. Use it as a slate mic or sell it and get one of the other two is my opinion. The overall winner here, to me, is the Rycote HC-15. The HC-22 performs very much like the HC-15, but with a narrower pickup pattern, bordering on too much detail and sibilance, but easily tameable with a windscreen. The 416 and the NTG3 were both very close to each other in all tests, and much more bassy than the Rycote. In the bedroom, the Rycote mic sounded more natural to me at closer heights, and when it went higher up, the mics all sounded very similar, so I really didn't have much of a preference. In my garage, on the other hand, the HC-22 stood out as having less bass and more detail. The 416 was my favorite at all heights and sounded much more balanced at the higher heights, while the Rycote sounded natural the whole ride up, and the Rode seemed to have more bass and less higher frequency detail. In the quiet exterior, the Rycote sounded a bit more muffled than the other two, and this might have been because it was getting killed by the wind, which it's far more sensitive to. The NTG3 and the 416 sounded fuller at both lower and higher heights, and the HC-22 lacks in highs and in detail compared to the other two, which sounded more full. In the noisy exterior, the 416 was the clear winner from a detail and balance in sound at all heights perspective. The Rycote and the Rode are very close, even though the Rycote has a little bit too little bass and the Rode has a little bit too much bass. I still think the clear winner here is the 416, even if it is $200 more. But as a second place, kind of take your pick there between the Rode and the Rycote. In closing, if you like both natural and detailed sound, then both Rycote shotgun microphones are probably going to suit you great for field recording. They certainly EQ nicely, I will say that. Now, the HC-15 being the shorter version, the low profile version, let's say, I personally find that I would reach for that one far quicker than I would the HC-22 over something like the 416. Personally, I think the HC-15 is a great size and sound for that particular size and form factor. When you get to a full-size shotgun microphone, the HC-22 has more to compete with. They are very resistant to high humidity. That, and combined with the impressive specifications, are top tier, and I really like that. What I'm not so sure about is the natural roll-off that happens below about 100 Hz. That to me is a weird choice, but I will say this. They're going for a detailed sound, and they achieved it. The only and biggest downfall, I would say, is the lack of proper wind protection. To me, this is a huge oversight considering that Rycote is the king in that field. To me, it would not take much for them to create a wind protection option that would actually end at that little red line right there. That would cover the vents and give it everything you would need to protection-wise without going too much into this. As it stands, their recommended wind protection swallows it up. I'm not a fan of this at all. Rycote, help us out with these, please. Oh, and one other note directly to Rycote. For the love of all things holy, take pride in your microphones and put them on your website. If you're interested in purchasing either of these microphones or wanting additional information, there are links down in the description. Thank you for tuning into this episode of Sound Speech. Be sure to tune in the future for more product reviews that might take me another 7 months. Who knows? And of course, sound advice.
Have a question you'd like answered or want to add something? Be sure to write it in the comment section down below. You can also make a suggestion for future topics of discussion. Again, comment section down below, or you can email me at soundspeeds@yahoo.com. Be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss out on future sound advice.